Hi, Tom Trento, Director of the United West, with some breaking news right now. In fact, it's coming in right now. There seems to be possible terrorism on the southern border of the United States. Apparently, is it the Islamic State, ISIS? Is that what it is?
Yes, it is.
With some Mexican cartels and tunnels for considering a catastrophic attack against the United States. And from what I understand, it's breaking now, there's a team, an elite team of a CIA agent who's a born-again Christian, an African-American retired Navy SEAL, a DEA Hispanic agent as part of this unique operational team. Wait a minute, this thing is starting to sound like some sort of Hollywood movie, not a terrorism attack. Well, maybe that's exactly what it is. And with us right now is the author of the book and the movie, Day of the Dead, Book 2, America, Dan Gordon. Captain Dan Gordon, welcome to the show. What is going on? Is this Hollywood or is this reality?
First of all, thanks for having me on, Tom. And unfortunately, the answer is yes.
You know, Dan, you have a unique background. You are a successful Hollywood screen producer, writer, screenwriter. You've authored so many books, but you've also spent over 40 years on the front lines in the Israeli Defense Forces. So you're able to bring fact and fiction together. And this story right now, your latest book, which is going to be a movie, is shocking. Give us an overview and tell us why it's so important for everyone to read.
Well, it really started in 2014 in Israel, in which I served. And there were 6 terrorist tunnel attacks that started in tunnels that were well inside Gaza, went underneath the border of Israel, came up inside of Israel next to kindergartens, dining halls, community centers. And you really had this image like something out of a zombie movie, like out of Night of the Living Dead, where the earth opens up and all of a sudden out pop 13 terrorists, each one of them with AK-47s, 2 RPGs apiece, grenades, thousands of rounds of ammunition, plastic handcuffs, which was the most frightening thing because it means that they intended to take civilian hostages, drag them back through the tunnels and imprison them in Gaza. And their battle plan was to end the hostilities with scores, if not hundreds, of Israeli men, women, and children held prisoner in Gaza in underground cells, which they had prepared. If you remember, Israel traded 1,000 terrorists to return 1 soldier, Gilad Shalit. So you can imagine if there were hundreds of civilians who were being held in Gaza, Israel would have been brought to its knees. It was an existential threat, the likes of which I haven't seen in 40 years as a soldier.
So how vulnerable is the U.S. to just such an attack as you're describing?
As I began to think about it, what I realized was the country that is most vulnerable to that type of attack isn't Israel, because Israel has its most elite troops on the border with Gaza. We have 24/7 surveillance. The first terrorist tunnel attack that happened, the terrorists were engaged inside of 90 seconds of popping up, and half the force was taken out with a Heron drone that fired a Hellfire missile. The other half tried to get back into Gaza, and within literally 2 minutes of that, they were engaged by ground forces. So Israel has that border covered like you can't believe. The country that's really vulnerable to it is our country, is the United States. And the places that are vulnerable to it are California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, any place that shares a border with Mexico. And there, the terrorists don't need to dig a single tunnel. The tunnels already exist. They're drug smuggling tunnels created by the cartels. All they have to do is rent one for the day. And I, in researching the book, and was in some of those tunnels, certain of the tunnels, the DEA guys said, well, we can tell this is Mexican construction. Others of the tunnels, they said, what does this look like to me? Meaning me as an Israeli soldier. And I said, this looks like Hamas to me. This looks like Gaza. They say, yeah, that's what it looks like to us as well.
So why use a tunnel when you can just come right across the border?
The reason you need a tunnel, and why you tunnels are useful. They're impervious to a superior enemy's technology to observe your movement. In other words, if you've got drones, if you've got dirigibles, if you've got eyes in the sky, if you've got boots on the ground, you're not going to see someone coming in a tunnel that's 100 feet deep. All your technology is worthless. It's ancient technology, tunnel warfare, but it's extremely, extremely effective. Nobody can see you until you pop up. The other thing is you can't just walk across the border with 1,000 guys with RPGs without somebody noticing. So if you really want to carry out a surprise attack where you inflict the most damage possible, you do tunnel warfare.
Isn't there a book based upon real-world events? Day of the Dead, Book 1, Gaza?
Book 1 of the series was called Day of the Dead, Book 1, Gaza, and it really set the stage in the 2014 war in Gaza. And that's when the President of the United States, who bears no resemblance to anyone that we know of, his name is Rafiq Mohammed Kabila, and he does not want to be in the Middle East. He's trying to withdraw the U.S. from the Middle East as much as possible. He hears of an ISIS plot. He hears that there are ISIS operatives in Gaza during the war. And he says, instead of sending in the SEALs and leaving an American footprint, the Israelis owe us anyway. Let's send in a small team to hitchhike with the Israelis. They'll go into Gaza. The Israelis will snatch and grab the ISIS bad guys. They'll interrogate them. Our team will feed them the questions and listen to the answers. When the team goes into Gaza, and it's made up of, as you said, a drop-dead gorgeous, beautiful 35-year-old born-again Christian CIA agent who's based on a real person who I know, and I'll give a shout out to her right now. She knows who she is. A 20-year black veteran of the Navy SEAL teams known as Papa SEAL, who's also based on a real guy. A Hispanic DEA agent named Raul Pena from New Mexico, and a 50-some-odd-year-old John Goodman-ish FBI counterterrorism agent whose main function in life is covering up for FBI foul-ups. They go to Israel, they hook up with an American-born, Israeli-raised intelligence officer from the Givati Brigade, and they go into Gaza with the ground troops when the invasion starts on the 7th day of the war. And when they get to the hideout, the main ISIS bad guy has already escaped and is on his way to Mexico. They capture the second ISIS bad guy, who unfortunately has an IED surgically implanted in his stomach. He detonates it, kills the FBI agent, kills one of the Givati soldiers, but they find his computer. And in the computer, they realize there's going to be a meeting in Tijuana between a very high-level ISIS operative and the head of the Tijuana drug cartel. So now the President of the United States tasked this same team with going to Mexico and surveilling where that meeting is going to take place and finding out if the plot is real.
Dan, is Day of the Dead, Book 2, America something you've created in your own mind? Or is there really a terrorist plot to attack San Diego from Mexico?
Indeed, the plot is real. ISIS is planning to infiltrate 1,000 hardcore ISIS terrorists. And what's terrifying about this is if you go on Wikipedia or Google and you Google James Clapper, Director of National Intelligence, I believe it was in February or March, something like that, he came out with an estimate where he said the director of American National Intelligence's official prediction estimate is that ISIS will attack the U.S. mainland, not with ISIS-inspired, self-radicalized people like the San Bernardino II, but it will ship over via probably Africa, going through Europe with no more than 2 or 3 people on a flight to South America, and then infiltrate them north to Mexico. It will ship over hardcore ISIS fighters, the best that they have, and they will do a mass casualty assault against the United States of America. That's not a Hollywood screenwriter's estimation. even though I began writing this book over a year ago. That was this spring, the official prediction of the Director of National Intelligence, General James Clapper.
San Bernardino, the deadliest terror attack on U.S. soil since 9/11, inspired by ISIS. Now the nation's top spies warn that the terror group will attempt to direct new attacks on the homeland this year.
ISIS leaders are determined to strike the U.S. homeland, beyond inspiring homegrown violent extremist attacks.
ISIL will probably attempt to conduct additional attacks in Europe and attempt to direct attacks on the U.S. homeland in 2016.
The scenario is all too real. I've been in those tunnels. You could very easily infiltrate 1,000 fighters. And the book imagines that they come up in a warehouse in downtown San Diego where people are used to seeing trucks going in and out all the time. So it's not a problem now to transport your fighters to different parts of the city because people are used to seeing trucks going in and out of this warehouse.
Two questions, Dan. Why would ISIS attack Southern California, San Diego? And are there tunnels there right now that exist from Mexico to San Diego?
They just found a tunnel in San Diego, and there was a house that was built, and the whole purpose of building the house was to hide the exit point of a tunnel. In other words, the cartel bought a piece of land, designed a house, built the house for the sole purpose of disguising where the tunnel came up. They found another tunnel that did come up in an industrial warehouse exactly the way it's described in the book. The reason that I said it in San Diego is ISIS usually wants to do two things when they're attacking. They want to humiliate your military. They don't necessarily want to deal at a death blow, but they want to send a message to the civilian population: we can strike your military whenever we want, and they're powerless to defend themselves, let alone defend you. So there are two very juicy targets in San Diego. One is one half the Pacific Fleet is at anchor in San Diego. The other is that one half of our naval special warfare operators are located in Coronado Island. Well, this country has an insane policy that U.S. military personnel are not allowed to carry weapons on U.S. military installations, which is why a fat psychiatrist, Major Nidal, not a trained soldier, an overweight, self-proclaimed jihadi, was able to kill 13 soldiers and wound dozens of other people with 2 handguns. Because when you disarm a soldier, when you take his weapon away from him, he's not a soldier anymore. He's a victim. He's a target. And so here you had highly trained soldiers who could have taken this fat piece of dung out in 2 seconds, but they didn't have a weapon because a U.S. soldier can't carry a weapon on a U.S. military installation because our government is more afraid of our own soldiers than they are of the terrorists who want to kill us. And the third target is, imagine any stadium that holds 18, 20,000 people who are listening to a rock concert or going to, a sporting event. And there are a couple sporting teams, professional teams in San Diego.
Let me stop you for a second. Not as an author, but from your military career over 40 years in the IDF, how difficult is this attack to execute from Mexico?
I am not Patton by any means. I'm a competent soldier. But if you gave even a doofus like me 200 well-trained, well-armed men, you turn me loose in a stadium of 18,000 people, and you give me guys who are not afraid to die, inside of a half an hour, I can kill thousands, not hundreds, easily, without, like I say, I'm not Patton, but that's an operation I could design and carry out and command tomorrow morning, and it would be really easy to do. And if ISIS pops up in San Diego, who's going to stop them? San Diego PD? With all due respect to San Diego PD, a police cruiser is no match for an RPG. I think we've all seen the videos of the French police car during the Charlie Hebdo attack that pulls up and encounters the terrorists and all of a sudden they see one of the terrorists put an RPG on his shoulder, and that Peugeot hits reverse and gets itself out of there. And the reason is a Peugeot is no match for a rocket-propelled grenade. It just that's not exactly a fair fight. So the truth of the matter is, and I've asked American security experts, what would happen if the President of the United States had 24 hours advance notice that there were 500, 1,000 ISIS operatives in Tijuana ready to strike the United States? What would happen? And the answer I got was, is there anyone who believes that this administration would bomb Tijuana? No. Is there anyone who believes that this administration would invade Tijuana, even if they knew where the bad guys were? No, under no circumstances. What would the President of the United States do? I asked. They said he would send a very stern message to the President of Mexico, saying, you must deal with this. Now, the President of Mexico doesn't control large swaths of Mexico. The drug cartels do. So it's welcome to our world. Then the President of the United States would notify the governor of California and say, we have news or warning of an imminent threat. You're the governor of California. If you'd like to call out the National Guard, the federal government is willing to extend you every bit of aid that we can. Now, to call out the National Guard, even if the National Guard in California does have a special operating group of National Guardsmen, they may be deployed to Afghanistan at that time. They may be here. Even if they're here, it will take them 24 to 36 hours under the best circumstances to be called up, grab their equipment, form a battle plan, lock and load, get the air assets that they need, and get to the scene in order to respond. The terrorist attack, however, will be over in a matter of hours.
What about all the Marines based right there in Camp Pendleton or the SEALs, very close by in Coronado?
But we also have something called the Posse Comitatus Act, which means that U.S. military is prohibited from acting on U.S. soil without a direct order of the President of the United States. Now, if you remember 9/11, there were no federal troops called out to New York after 9/11. They were all National Guard. You go to New York today, you will not see the 101st Airborne in Grand Central Station. You'll see New York National Guardsmen, and God bless them. But again, unlike Israel, which has its most elite special forces, locked and loaded, ready to roll 24 hours a day on the border with Gaza, we have a border patrol which can't deal with the illegal immigrants who are coming across right now. They certainly would be outmanned, outgunned, and outfought by ISIS. So that's a real, frightening, true, and not only possible scenario, extraordinarily plausible.
So is this scenario, which you've brilliantly laid out in your book, only pertaining to San Diego? What percentage would you put on a mass casualty attack somewhere on the border, or an attack that is at least in its planning stages?
I guarantee you 100%. There are enterprising young majors and lieutenants colonel, or the equivalent thereof, in ISIS, who are presenting plans or have already presented plans to their staff for mass casualty attacks in the United States.
So, are we doing anything to prevent this from happening?
I believe the Jade Helm was an exercise of what the United States would do to respond to a mass casualty assault of ISIS. The problem with that, and it's a huge problem, is the response took 8-10 hours. The attack will take 2 hours. But worse than that, the thinking is, how do I respond after an attack? Not how do I prevent an attack from happening? And that really is where the shift has to happen in this strategic thinking, is not how do we respond once 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people have been killed, but it's how do we prevent them from being killed in the first place?
That is shocking, Dan, and I must say, you've laid it all out in your book, and what an amazing book it is. Folks, if you like a Tom Clancy type of exciting read with cutting-edge technology, with humor, with emotional relationships, with insider military strategy, then Dan Gordon, who's been on both sides, an author, a screenwriter, and a military leader, has put just such a book together, and you got to get it. Dan, where can the people get your new book, Day of the Dead, Book 2, America?
Liberty Hill Publishing, Day of the Dead, Book 2, America. Or they can just go on to Amazon and use their search engine and look for Day of the Dead, Book 2, America. If they want to buy both books or haven't yet read Book 1 is a great read. It sets the table. Obviously, I'd prefer if you buy both books.
Highly suggest you get both books. Read Gaza first, then America, and you read them, again, as an exciting thriller and fascinating read, but also as an overview of the way the jihadis think and the way the jihadis act. It's critically important. Dan Gordon, thank you very much for being with us today. We will have you back regularly to get updates on your writing. We know you're doing some film projects, and just stay in touch with you, because we leave next year in May, once again, for a mission, and we're going to put a little short video out in the near future inviting folks on that trip. Thank you very much, Dan Gordon. Have a wonderful day.